and we decided to check our weights. At that time, I weighed in at 63 kilograms instead of the 67 that I had been when I first went to the doctor. So I was very excited about that. Before, I was still very into that health at every size mindset, and I did not want to think that actually weight could actually influence my health. I knew that there was that relationship based on general knowledge and the fact that I was a diet coach because I finished my certification in 2021. But because I had fallen deep into that health at every size mindset, Hello there and welcome back to D's Health Diaries. My name is Daisy, aka D, and I'm a certified diet coach. So today I'm going to be talking about how I lost weight despite having hypothyroidism. I know that this is an issue that many people think about. I've seen many people say that they are unable to lose weight because they have hypothyroidism. And I'm going to tell you the story of how I lost my weight and exactly what I did. And here's the funny thing. The whole time that I was losing the weight, I did not actually know that I had hypothyroidism. But even after I found out that I had hypothyroidism, I was still able to keep it off. So let's get started. This is going to be an interesting story, and I'm going to add proof of photos and maybe even some videos along the way so that you can see that it's actually doable as I explain exactly what I did. So without much further ado, let's get started. We're going to start at the beginning of my story, and this is something that I went through for years. I went through it for about 2 years. What I noticed was that my energy was very low. I was very tired. I would wake up after sleeping for 12 hours and I would still be tired. And I was finding myself going to hospital much more often because I wanted the doctors to explain exactly why I was feeling so tired. And each time they will try to look for a reason, they couldn't find it, and they will actually think that it was more to do with my mental health, and they were not able to find out exactly why I was feeling very tired, why I had low energy. And this continued for years. And then along the way, I also started getting a lot of nausea. I would go to hospital and they will run tests, and then they will see that maybe I had some H. pylori, and they will give me antibiotics. But the whole time I was feeling tired, it wasn't helping. None of the medication was working. At the same time, I was gaining weight, and it was very gradual. So, like year by year, I would notice that I was filling out my clothes more. And this was despite the fact that I was working out. I was working out, I was lifting weights, I was doing cardio, I was going on hikes, I was swimming, but I was still gaining weight. And people will say that I was active, and I knew that I was very active, and I thought that I was doing everything I needed to be healthy, but still the weight was going up. So it was a constant struggle. At around 2022, I discovered health at every size, and I'm going to make another video about this. And at that time, I decided to stop fighting my weight and just let it be. I started honoring my hunger cues and my fullness cues, and I'll find myself just eating enough to feel full. Because there was no good or bad food, I found myself eating things like Oreos and pizzas, and I would eat cereal at night because I was hungry, and there was no difference between a vegetable and having Weetabix at dinner. No matter, and throughout all of this, I was gaining weight, I was still feeling tired, and I was just feeling sick, but I didn't know what was happening because doctors could not find anything. The only thing I knew was that scale was reading a higher number each time that I stepped on it. It got to a point that I just stopped tracking and I just let everything be. So eventually, somewhere in 2023, actually at the beginning of the year, I ended up going to hospital because I was very nauseated and I was not feeling well. And so when the doctor ran tests, they found out that I had gastroesophageal reflux disease. And I think I'll also make another video about that. But at the time, I weighed 67 kilograms, and in pounds, I'm going to put what that is here. And the doctor told me that I had two options. The first one was to lose weight because I was overweight. I was overweight by 5 kilograms based on what my weight should be. That's about 11 pounds overweight. And usually that wouldn't cause issues for people, but for me it was causing an issue. And I either had to lose that weight or undergo surgery. And when you have the options of lose weight or go through surgery, it's easier to lose the weight. But at that time, I was still in my health at every size mindset. And I actually argued with the doctor, and I told him that what I had was muscle and that was not fat. It was fat. And at that time, I decided to undergo the lifestyle changes that he had recommended. I started with an elimination diet, and I did that for about 2 months. At that time, I was just trying to find out what my trigger foods were and to eliminate them from my diet. And I did that for a while, and eventually I started noticing that my symptoms were disappearing. I was not as nauseated as before, but still, I still had the initial symptoms of the fatigue and everything, but the nausea was gone. So one day I'm walking around with my friend and we see this random health checkup and we decide to check our weights. At that time, I weighed in at 63 kilograms instead of the 67 that I had been when I first went to the doctor. So I was very excited about that. Before, I was still very into that health at every size mindset, and I did not want to think that actually weight could actually influence my weight. Weight could actually influence my health. I knew that there was that relationship based on general knowledge and the fact that I was a diet coach because I finished my certification in 2021. But because I had fallen deep into that health at every size mindset, I did not want to think of weight as having any relationship with health. But this time I could not ignore the facts because I had lost 4 kilograms and my symptoms had reduced. And I realized that if I can get this reduction in symptoms by just losing 4 kilograms, what would happen if I actually went down to a healthier weight? And based on my BMI, I can weigh anything between 47 kilograms to 62 kilograms. And I know that BMI is a touchy issue, and some people have said that it's not actually a good measure of health. But I feel that unless you're a bodybuilder or you have other specific conditions that make it harder for you to fit into that BMI category, then it's okay for you to use the BMI as a measure of health. And at that point, I decided to stop denying what was happening and instead just face the issue head on. And I decided to work towards my goal weight, and my goal weight at that time was 52 kilograms. So this is where I was. I had the diet coach certification. I had coached clients before on how to lose weight before I went into that health at every size mindset, and I could see that it was working. So what I decided to do was just work towards that 52 kilograms. So now that's what I'm going to take you through. The first thing I did was that I started paying attention to my calories. I calculated my total daily energy expenditure, and from that, I worked with a deficit of 300 calories. I did not want to go too low because I did not want to get into a place where I felt that I was struggling, but I also did not want to have a deficit that was so small that I could not see the changes. So I cut 300 calories from my total daily energy expenditure, and I will follow this calorie deficit for 3 months. And then after 3 months, I will take a break for 2 months, and then I will come back, calculate my TDEE again, and then cut 300 calories from that, and then continue for 3 months. And I kept doing this. So it's 3 months on, 2 months off, 3 months on, 2 months off. And in 8 months, I had already come down to 56 kilograms. So that was another loss of 7 kilograms, which in pounds will be about around 15 pounds in just 8 months. So I was at 56, I only needed to go down to 52. And it was working, and I kept doing that until I got to 52. The second thing I did was I started paying attention to the kind of food that I was eating, because it's very easy to just cut from maybe, let's say you're 2000 and go down to 1700, and it's 1700 calories of pizza. And in my previous video, I talked about why calories are not equal and why it's important to think about the kind of food that you're eating in terms of macros and in terms of whether it's whole food, whether it's processed. Those things matter. So in my case, I started focusing more on the 80-20 rule, where I would eat 80% whole unprocessed foods or minimally processed foods. And then for the 20%, I would eat junk food. I loved Oreos. I was not about to give up Oreos. So what I'll do, I'll calculate my total calories. Maybe it's like 2000 calories that day. And then around 20% will just go to junk food. And then I'll fit Oreos somewhere in there. But mine was not 2000. I think I was doing 1600 a day. So I'll have maybe one serving of Oreos per day. And that worked. I was having Oreos, I was having bread. I could have pizza if I went out, but I was still maintaining 80% whole foods. And that worked for a long time because whether I was on or whether I was off, I was still able to have these treats every day, and that made it more sustainable for me. In fact, that's something that I advocate for when I'm coaching clients, because doing the whole cold turkey thing where you just come from eating maybe the standard junk food diet and then you just come down to eating a whole foods diet, you'll just feel like you're missing out on a lot. The more restricted you feel, the easier it is for you to now to like backslide into your bad habits once you're done with the break, like the diet, the calorie deficit. So let's say if you are just doing 2000 calories of whole foods and now you've stopped on your diet break, you might find that you're reaching more for those junk foods that you are not able to have, and you might find that you're even going above maintenance. So it's always better to find a way to eat those foods as part of your diet, but then not make them like the substantial part of it. But if you can go 100% whole foods, that's better. But in my case, I did not do that because I was coming from a history of eating pizzas and Oreos and bread and cereal for dinner. So what I did was work with 80% and 20%, and that worked. The third thing that I did was start exercising for mood instead of as a way to lose weight. And in this case, I had already been lifting weights. I was very active. I would hike, I would swim. I'll include some pictures and videos here so that you can see. I was very active. In fact, I remember like in 2021, I climbed Lemon Brabant, and it's really a tough climb. It's in Mauritius. It was really hard, but I did it. I was also hiking. I climbed Mount Kenya. I'll also include a picture of that here. I was always active, but I was still gaining weight. So I knew that exercise was not the way to lose weight, but it was a way to improve my mood and also my body composition. So I kept working out. I started lifting 2 to 3 times a week, and I was lifting heavier, and I did the progressive overload, but I was not that serious about it because I did not really like sign up to a gym or buy a very, very heavy set. Instead, I worked with a 50-kilogram dumbbell set. It has parts that you can take out, and then you can use each part individually. So like maybe if I was doing bicep curls, or use maybe like 6 kilograms per hand. It was a very versatile way for me to keep working out without straining my body. And then I also did cardio 2 to 3 times a week, and it worked. Like you can see now, I have that muscle definition, and I did that for, let's say, the whole time that I was losing weight. I kept doing that, and even after I had gotten to my weight loss target, that was 52 kilograms, I still kept doing that because you still need to eat within your calorie limits. You still need to eat within your total daily energy expenditure even after you've lost weight. If you want to keep it off, you still need to eat more whole foods if you want to keep the weight off, and you still need to work out. You don't really need to work out to lose weight, but it's nice to work out if you want to, build muscle and feel good. Working out is good for you. It's a very, very good way to even deal with the emotional stresses that come your way. So finally, in August last year, that's 2024, I finally got to my weight goal. Actually, my weight goal was 52 kilograms, but by August, I was down to 51.5 kilograms. And now I started just working on maintaining that. And like I've said, I maintained it by doing the same things that I did to lose the weight. So still watching my total daily energy expenditure, I was still eating whole foods, and I was still working out at least 2 to 3 times a week. I would lift, and then 2 times a week I would do cardio. And cardio is anything from Zumba to hiking to cycling, anything that just gets that heart rate racing. So now, how about my hypothyroidism? Okay, when I first started losing weight, I did not even know that I had hypothyroidism. All I knew was that I was tired, I had low energy, and I kept going to the hospital, in and out of hospital, but the doctors could not find out what was wrong with me. And the whole time I was losing weight, I noticed that I was feeling better considerably in terms of the nausea, but the fatigue and the low energy were still there. They were not as bad as when I was overweight, but they were still there. So in August, when I went for my annual health checkups, and I have to say that before I would go for my annual health checkups, and they wouldn't run a complete thyroid panel, and sometimes they wouldn't even run the thyroid panel. So it took a while for them to finally catch up to what was happening. So in August, that's when they ran the whole thyroid panel, and they found out that I actually had elevated TSH, and that was the first sign that I had hypothyroidism. But at that time, I was not ready to go on medication. I've done a whole video on that and why I waited so long before I started seeking medication. But at that time, I did not go on medication, and I still was able to keep the weight off. In fact, I only started medication this year in June, and that did not work out well for me because they put me on levothyroxine, and levothyroxine was not working for my body. In fact, I had a conversion issue, and I was getting reverse T3 out of the levothyroxine, and what I really needed was T3, which, like I said, is not available where I'm living at this moment, but I'll be able to get it maybe next month when I finally move back to where I reside, which is Turkey. And so the whole time that I was on levothyroxine, the whole time that I was unmedicated, and even when I came off levothyroxine, I was still able to keep my weight there at 52. And I know people say that it's very hard for you to lose weight with hypothyroidism. People say that it's very hard for you to lose weight when you're on levothyroxine. People say that you cannot lose weight when you're not medicated. But I've proven that it's possible because it's been over a month since I got off levothyroxine, and my weight is still stable. In fact, the only change that I've seen is because I've been lifting more right now because I'm trying to bulk up a bit more. And so I can notice that there's a change in my muscle definition. You can see that I have more muscle now. Okay, assuming that you knew the kind of muscle I had before, but I have more muscle definition right now, but my weight is still relatively the same. And I still have hypothyroidism, and I am unmedicated like I was last year when I finally got to my goal weight. So my point is, it is possible to lose weight with hypothyroidism whether or not you're on medication. Of course, it's easier to lose weight when you're on medication, but I feel like the thing that maybe pulls people back is because they think that hypothyroidism kind of messes up your metabolism to a point where you cannot lose weight. It's true that hypothyroidism will lower your basal metabolic rate. So you might be like anything from 5 to 20% below what someone else would be at if they had everything that you have, other than the fact that you have hypothyroidism. Like if there were two of you and only one of you had hypothyroidism, the one with hypothyroidism will have a metabolic rate that will be 5 to 20% lower than that of the other person. But that's the only difference. When it comes down to what's going to help you lose weight, it's still the same things that will work for someone else who's trying to lose weight. Of course, in your case, it's a bit more complicated because you're working with a lower metabolic rate. But there are ways that you can raise that, including building muscle. There's a reason I keep working so much on this muscle, because muscle is metabolically active. It's more metabolically active compared to fat. And if you have more muscle, you're eating more whole foods, and you're staying within your total daily energy expenditure, then it's going to be easier for you to maintain your weight. If you want to lose weight, then yes, you have to come down to a calorie deficit. And as much as yes, you do have hypothyroidism, and it's going to be a bit harder for you to lose weight, it's the same thing that you would do for any other condition that makes you have a hard time losing weight. You have to keep at it. You have to believe in the process, trust the process, and you have to just keep going. You have to maybe work more on incorporating more whole foods. And instead of demonizing some foods, like maybe you say carbs are bad, or like fats are bad, or any other thing that you think is bad for you, I think it's more important to look at the bigger picture, because maybe some people say that carbs are bad for you. And I faced some backlash from my previous video where I said carbs are not making you fat. And yes, they are not. The type of carbs matter. If you're eating sweet potatoes, you're not the same as someone who's eating Oreos. And I say this as someone who switched from Oreos to sweet potatoes. I know there's a difference between foods. Carbs are not the same, fats are not the same, proteins are not the same. You need to focus more on the whole foods, and then work out more and give yourself enough rest days. Because like I said, I work out 2 to 3 times of weightlifting, and then I do 2 to 3 times of cardio, and then I make sure I have at least 2 rest days, because rest is also important. The more you're working out and you're not giving your body time to rest, the more you're creating an environment where inflammation can reign in your body. So you still need to give yourself a break as much as you're working towards losing weight. And then you have to remember that exercise is not the way that you lose weight. It's a way. It helps you create some of that deficit, but most of the deficit will come from your food. So that's why the emphasis is on whole foods. If you're tired and you're gaining weight and you feel like your body is working against you, yes, I have been there, and I know how tiring it can be. What you need is not perfection. What you need is consistency and patience, because for me to get to that point, it took me about 1.5 years to finally get to my goal weight. That was a loss of 15 kilograms, which is about 30 pounds, and I took 1.5 years to get there. You need to be patient with yourself and not push your body too much, because the same way that you lose the weight is the same way that you keep it off. So you need to learn those things slowly and incorporate them into your life. Of course, everyone follows a very individual approach when it comes to weight loss, and that's why in my program Better in 90, I make sure that I guide you on what exactly works for you. But even if you're not ready to sign up to my program, you can still lose the weight. Just remember to pay attention to your total daily energy expenditure and eat more whole foods, and then move more, but then don't move so much that you're straining your body. It's just those 3 things and the weight will come off. Of course, it will take time. Like I said, in my case, it took 1.5 years to lose 15 kilograms, which is about 30 pounds. Of course, it could have been faster, but my goal was to incorporate these things slowly so that I could keep the weight off for good. And maybe I had the advantage of my diet coaching certification to help me with that, and that's why I was able to trust the process a bit more. And I have worked with clients who feel that they should see their results within 2 weeks or a month, and it takes them a while to realize that it takes a bit longer than that. I know that you can feel the urgency to just lose the weight now, but you have to remember that you've come from far. Like even if you're trying to lose 5 pounds, it took you a while to gain those 5 pounds, it will take you a while to lose those 5 pounds. And the farther you are from your goal weight, the longer it will take to get to where you're going. But the idea should not just be to just get to where you're going, it should be get there and also find a way to stay there. That's all for today. And be on the lookout for the next video. I'll talk about why I left health at every size, and why I now advocate for weight loss, and why I actually believe in the BMI now. And yes, it's because it affected my health, but it's because I've also seen it affect other people's health. And I also feel like we're finally veering away from the whole fat acceptance trend. I know there are many people who still believe in it, but I feel like we have made a lot of headway, and we're finally going to be looking at health as one thing. We're not going to skinny talk, but we're also not going to fat talk. Okay, see you next time.